you have never grasped what is integrity. Many people think that whatever they are doing is what is the culture. Nakwambia hii ni kawaida. That's what people will say. Everybody does it, and they justify it that way. So I think for me, the starting point is the culture change. We need to start very serious culture change, especially in public life. All these people need to go back to the Kenya School of Government to be schooled in the culture of doing things. Because many of them have just popped from somewhere. Maybe he failed an election, he's given a job, and he does the way he was running his political campaign is what he does in the public. So we really have to take that. You must get an annual certificate in government on the issue of corporate government and culture.
Thank you. Right, thank you. I think we need to now go to, of course, the meter of the discussion today, which is the plan.
Yes.
That is how they named the manifesto of the bottom-up economic transformation agenda 2022-2027. As you can see it on your screen momentarily there, the plan. And we look at some of the issues that they had teased out that they will be key for this particular manifesto with our panelists here. Maybe, first of all, before we even drill deeper, I hope most of you, at least you are intimately familiar with the plan.
Yes. And
some of the key elements that maybe stood out for you, especially James Romeo, looking at the micro, small enterprises as well. There's a good promissory note for you within the manifesto. Looking at the stock market as well, just broadly. The service economy, this was one of the bigger pillar as well. You can try and, tease out some of the things that you picked from the manifesto itself. I'll just go to some of the pages here and see, because we can't just read all of it, and we run it by our viewers just briefly what they had said. And first, they are quick wins according to them. And we have it here that prioritization is critical because resources are scarce, but also because we do not have the capacity to do everything at once. Limited resources means that we must choose, but choosing one person's preference over another can create winners and losers, thereby undermining the goodwill needed to have everyone pulling in the same direction. If we just put it on screen, please, so we may go together with the verse. And the question is coming at a time when globally the economy is really tanking, as you've just established, and we can see from other dailies as well internationally. Right now, also, we have fears with the dollar that it might be, of course, even at parity with not really the dollar, but the sterling pound, at parity with the US dollar. And it's also going down. The yen as well is being spooked. We have the Ukraine war, we have the fuel crisis, we have the energy crisis. And Ruto is...
a brave man.
Yeah, is actually inheriting a government from his government, so to speak, because this is essentially his government. At the end of the day, working in tandem with Uhuru Kenyatta, that is saddled with so much debt as it is right now. Where does he start? On the quick wins, short terms, medium plans, and the long terms. He says first, financing principles and frameworks. Physical consolidation is part of it. The plan must be financed with a budget deficit target of 3% by financial year 2026-2027. This will be achieved by ensuring that revenue projection will not exceed the average growth in preceding 3 years, and expenditure growth capped at 75% of the revenue growth rate. And B, budget neutrality for new programs to be financed, and resources must be released by another program or project that is either completed or closed. Let's begin with you, Kipon.
Yeah, I think, Debal, we need to contend with some macroeconomic realities that Kenya is faced with, including what we heard at the beginning of this debate. We have gone from a country that the Kibaki administration had a public debt of $13 billion to one that is burdened now with a $72 billion debt. We've seen our GDP, even though it's rebased from time to time to sort of perhaps give it greater capacity for debt soaking, we've actually seen a situation where there's a suppressed commercial activity, particularly if you went into the hinterland of this country. At the same time, we've also seen, the government 10 years ago pronounce itself on the Big Four agenda. And I remember one time we debated about 5 years ago, and I suggested that we need to have, a mid-term review on the Big Four agenda, and I was quite critical of of at least two of the pillars of the Big Four agenda, which I felt were not perhaps in tandem with where we were as a country. And I remember, in fact, after that debate on KTN, I got a call from a very senior official in this country saying, "What business of yours is that?" And I said, as a citizen of this country, we need to face these realities, or else one day we will be held to task. We will be asked to account for the time that we were in office dealing with these issues. Now, I've also read extensively about the bottom-up economic policies. There's Philip Oxon from McGill, there's Michael Hose, who's a Fulbright scholar, who's written very extensively about the bottom-up economy. I've also, in the last few days, been speaking to my old university mate, David Ndii, particularly after listening to himself articulate the vision that they have under the Kenya Kwanza coalition. And what pleases me is that they have a strong focus on agriculture. There's an MSME focus as well. They're also looking at the issue of housing and settlement. They're also looking at the issue of healthcare, digital transformation, and manufacturing. But you see, we have to look at that in the context of the macroeconomic reality. We have this huge public debt that must be reduced. We have the issue of 800,000 Kenyans coming into the job market every year that require to be engaged. And the bottom up, from a theoretical perspective, it's all about participation of local communities in setting their development initiatives and also goal setting. It focuses more on the small scale, and it focuses on an employment, creative sort of industrial approach, where rather than have big industries with low employment, you would have smaller scale industries with a lower capex but higher employment potential. So for me, I think the real possibilities are in creating a renaissance in agriculture. And I think many times I've spoken about it, and I'd like to emphasize it again, that I think, and I'm very happy that William Ruto is one of the politicians in Kenya who really gets agriculture and what it can do to transform a country. And, I come from the breadbasket district of Trans Nzoia, county of Trans Nzoia. But if you look at the agricultural practice in Trans Nzoia, in Uasin Gishu, in Narok, in Laikipia, today, and what they were 30 years ago, and Debiso was with me 30 years ago in that county, there isn't much difference.
True.
We haven't infused and collapsed our water resources into agriculture. We haven't improved our scientific agricultural practices. So it doesn't surprise me when we say we have a food crisis, because our productivity has not been able to sustain the population that we have. So I think agriculture is a potential quick win. And I think also manufacturing. I mean, David Ndii spoke about that last week and said that, look, rather than set up a bullet factory in Uhuru, how about if we went the model of what the Kitui County government did with the juice and the fruit factory that has a much smaller capex, but it employs a lot more people. I wouldn't want to speak much more because my colleagues are still here, but I think that it's very important that we do a deep dive, we interrogate the business model that they have come up with, and we really wait and see what the implementation framework will look like.
All right, Bill Okiru.
Yeah, I think the most important thing in my view is to address some of the challenges of the current administration. It's about misplaced priorities. In my view, Uhuru's administration, Uhuru's performance it's about misplaced priorities. If this coming government would really choose their priorities as they've said and walk the talk, because it's one thing to say we are going to do this, and another when you follow the manifesto and put it back on the shelves. But if they actually say they're going to do what they have said they're going to do, address all those issues in the manner that they have set out, I think then we'll see some changes. But even before we get there, I think there are some not just on macro level, but I think there are some challenges that they need to address very quickly. For example, the morning after his swearing in on 13th, which is the 14th, it's the date the petrol prices are due for review.
Yes.
And Treasury has been, talking loudly that, we'll remove those subsidies. IMF is saying we want the taxes increased so that they can get their loans paid. So I think it needs quite a bit of time to get some of the, put the house in order first before you even think of where to start in terms of its priorities. because there are a lot of things that happen which he needs to address, especially with regards to the prices of unga, the fuel, and those, the basic, there are challenges. This guy's he's taking over the coffers when it's dry. I mean, that's a fact. Everyone knows. You talk to government ministries, there's no money. Counties are areas, billions of shillings in areas. So there are challenges. I think they need a bit of time before they can even get to the bottom up. They need to clean up. And for me, the most fundamental thing in addressing this is not about just cutting down expenditure or whatever, but I think it's putting your priorities right. That is the most important thing. Look at the basic needs of Kenyans. What do Kenyans want? Not what you want. The challenge with Uhuru's administration has been what he wants. I want a road here, he wants that road, look for the money. I want a railway there, look for the money. I want to put a railway. It's about a legacy. That if you go away from that, what you want, and you go to what is necessary for your people, based on the input. You remember the Vision 2030 when they started. They went around, I mean, it was there was a lot of input by Kenyans of what they want to do, complete with the matrix of timelines and everything. I mean, it's not something that you wake up in the morning, we want to start laptops. Following morning, I want to start Galana. And there's no room for discussion. You have to do it. Ministries are told, I want this done. Parliament is bulldozed. Approve this. Give us the billions. Even in spite of the ministry and everyone telling you this laptop thing is not going to, we are not ready. Schools don't have laboratories. The schools don't have electricity. The schools don't have this. You say, no, I want it. So I think if it gets away from that and it goes to the priorities of what is needed in this country by the people. Today the issue is about economy. It's about people not having money, people not having food, people not having the basics. 1/3 of this country has no even water, clean water. Over 4 or 5 million people are today facing starvation. You've never seen Uhuru talk about people who are dying of starvation. He watches on TV every day, people are in Turkana cooking, wild fruits. It's not a priority to his government. He's never addressed it. He has never visited the entire northern parts of this country where the people have challenges. I come from northeastern Mandera, Wajir, Garissa. Uhuru has visited in the last 10 years Mandera once, and he visited Garissa once, and he visited Wajir once, and Turkana. All those, he has no time for some of those things. His focus is on other things. So I think if this guy, the new president, is focused on the country, on their priorities, I think you will see some change, but they need to do a bit of housekeeping first.
So he's beginning from a point of acknowledgement of the reality that we have scarce resources. And, he says prioritization is critical because resources are scarce, and also because we do not have the capacity to do everything at once. So what are some of these quick wins that we should be looking on? I think when we mentioned, food security and people who are dying, we can leave alone, some of this, the hustler funds that we talk about, that can actually be shaken into place along the way. But can we now turn our focus on the quick wins? What will be the quick wins? It says within 100 days, that cannot be a quick turnaround even within 100 days. This is just rhetoric that we normally hear from the ground, but we can't really achieve much in 100 days. But what will be some of the quick wins that we should look for with the president?
Yes.
Also as well?
I think literally the manifesto speaks for itself in terms of what we call bottom up. We are at the bottom, so we must just go up. It can't get worse. And 2 days ago,
That's not the meaning.
Kent is creating new economic concepts.
The 2 days ago, Tanzania banned the export of maize to Kenya. And now the millers are up in arms. They're crying because they are going to run out of stock of raw material. Let's hope this was just a coincidence, that we're just about to swear in a new president and we'll have a shortage of maize. That is the immediate challenge, which means we have to deal with stabilizing the price of our staple food. Based on that, I am sure the president may discuss We're at bilateral level with President Sulu. But all the same, the message that is giving us is, why would Tanzania, Zambia, Malawi become food self-sufficient in maize, and yet we used to export to all these countries? Kiprono and I come from Kitale, and the farmers have been crying about maize. Fortunately, President Ruto understands this challenge in terms of maize and agricultural produce. So within the short term, what you're asking about gains, if you look at the manifesto, they have what they call within 6 months. That's about 180 days. What can be done? And one of the areas that I've looked at is dairy farming, and the other one is seasonal crops. Now, that is the policy and that is the plan. And there's obviously the issue of pending bills, meaning that people's money is being held up within public institutions or was diverted. So if you deal with these three issues, money goes in, disposable income goes up, and then within this short term, that's 6 months immediate, the economy will feel the push. Now, the rain pattern has changed in this country because of its global issue. So we can no longer very much trust on what we used to say rain-fed irrigation, which means short rains, long rains. So obviously, in line with this, to achieve this, you need to build or to identify what we call water sources. Many of the rivers have dried up, streams have dried up. The water table has gone down, so you need to go deeper to get water. So one of the most urgent thing is to do what we call a water resource mapping survey to know what kind of water do we have. Even in Nairobi, we are beginning to experience water shortage. So for farmers, for us to achieve this, we must start putting up water, extend the water, whether it's boreholes, whether it is shallow wells, but this has to be mapped up. When you come to 6 to 18 months period, there is something which Bureau is passionate about, and it will help, which is the feedlots for cattle. It's very sad when you see that farmers in the northern part of Kenya have lost their entire animal population. So one of the things that is being looked at is feedlot for cattle. If that goes together with the rehabilitation of some certain cash crops that had disappeared, that is coffee, cashew nuts, and so forth, then you are also devolving and extending the agricultural system. That is before we come to the 18 to 36 months, which is the medium-term plan. So I'm just talking of the immediate short-term, and that's what you wanted to know. A lot of the emphasis here is on what? Is on agriculture.
Thank you. All right, but let me just come to you because micro, small, and medium enterprise economy also is one cog of this particular manifesto. And we had Kenya Kwanza commitment, first of all, that they will end criminalization of work. And they say we will enact a right to work law, making trading license and provision of a trading location an entitlement to every citizen who applies. We will work with county governments to provide one-street trading premises for every 50 urban residents with a view to increasing average daily income of informal traders by 200 shillings. Also regressive taxation, bureaucracy and regulatory compliance costs. We will review and rationalize all business licenses capped to total licenses at 1.5% of turnover, and enact an administrative burden law that is similar to U.S. Reduction of Paperwork Act, ensuring no business spends more than 4 persons' hours a month on tax and regulatory compliance. We could talk about this too, first of all, especially on taxation. And we saw recently, I think the day before yesterday, I splashed on the Business Daily that almost over 500 farms have been denied the waivers they were seeking for from the taxman. But taxation is a niggling worry as it is. Is it Mreo? Oh yeah, it is actually the chair of MSME.
Right, Val, thank you very much. I think for me, where we sit as an institution, our worry is as much as that of the president right now. Because during the campaigns, during these manifestos, a lot of things, everybody, all the candidates, Wajakoya, Maore, everybody talked about the space we operate in, which is the micro and small enterprise space. And having listened to the two leading presidential candidates, Right Honorable Amolo Odinga and Deputy President Ruto then, they presented their manifestos. I sit in Kepsa board as the chair of the economic diplomacy, and they presented their manifestos then. And just picking from what the Deputy President then and President-elect now said about policies, he said he does not need new policies in this country. He has enough policies. What he needs is to implement those policies. And he gave a very good example about increasing the milk yield in this country. And he said, if you want to increase milk in this country, you don't need more cows. You actually need to facilitate the farmers with the right extension officers and give the right ingredients, the right feed to the animals to increase the milk yield. He said, if you want to increase the crop yield, the maize and whatever, you don't need, again, bigger farms. You only need to get the high-yielding crop variety. And so for me, those are the areas that he's going to be addressing. Now, if you look at the institution that we work for, or where I'm chair, the micro and small enterprise, first of all, is present in all the constituencies, the entire 290 constituencies of this country. We are present, meaning we are right at the grassroots. We also employ upwards of 85% of the workforce in formal employment and formal employment, 85%, and contribute 25% to national GDP. Now, an institution like that has, for the longest time, been thoroughly underfunded. Now, if you inject money at that, you can see where the bottom is. We are at the bottom of the pyramid, and that is where the high impact is. And so, just listen to what the president-elect said. If he infuses money, resources below, you see the bank strata, the banking strata, then there's the microfinance strata. Now, if he goes below the banking, the microfinance strata, he will be able then to impact the bottom person there. And that is where you have about 14 million people sitting and waiting for support. What the effect of that will be is the high impact. That is where the high impact is. And the knock-on effect will be much higher, much felt than anywhere starting at the top. All right? Now, if you look at the areas that he talked about, the agribusiness transformation, we are in the business of building cold rooms. For example, in Uhuru, we've done a cold room to enhance the potato value chain and save the farmer from post-harvest losses. Mm-hmm. Now, with that, adjacent to that cold room, if they put a potato value chain business park, you can get your chips, you can get your potato flour, you can get your crisps, you can get chips that are otherwise being imported from Egypt by KFC, will be made out of that business park, agribusiness park. And so it is not rocket science, it is doable. We have the resources, we have what it takes. All that he ought to look at is the high impact areas, and the bottom of this pyramid is where the high impact is. If you look at one of the other roles that we have is to build what we call CIDCs, the CIDCs, the Constituency Industrial Development Centers. These are common use facilities which are built in every constituency where we can build, put up a building and equip it with the common use facilities like welding machines, cutting machines, spray painting machines for the jua kali. What in essence that means is we can improve the products that we make out of these jua kali shades and centers for export. So there are areas that are already, the only thing that has been lacking is adequate finances and resources to continuously upgrade, because we even in a constituency we have one CIDC. We could do with 10 in different areas. I mean, just the fact that we did a cold room in Nyandarua, immediately Kinangop started saying we also need a cold room. So does Naivasha, so does Kisumu, because of fish. So really it's a question of allocating resources, however small they are, but directing them to where they will have maximum impact, high impact areas. And for me, I see the Micro and Small Enterprise Authority has requisite networks across the whole country to be able to partner with the president in executing this mandate.
Thank you.
Yeah.
For
me, I agree completely with what James Murray said. You know, he and I worked together for many years in the Chamber of Commerce, and we were both champions for the SME. One of the things that I think would be a quick win is revamping and revitalization of capital markets. As the chair of the NSE, I can say with no fear of contradiction that the last few years have been extremely uninspiring. And I think one of the things that really disappoints me about the Kenyatta regime is that we tried many times to engage with him, to engage with the top leadership of government, with the National Treasury, to say, why don't we create a vibrant capital market where funds can be raised for both public sector and for private sector. Today we have, in our security exchange, about 2.3 trillion shillings worth of equities and about 2.8 trillion shillings worth of bonds. So we are a market that's about 5 trillion shillings. If you look at that, it's really not a significant growth from what it was, say, 7 or 8 years ago. In the 10 years that President Kibaki ruled Kenya, we saw a great resurgence of capital markets. The stock exchanges were vibrant, companies were listing. And we have presented a plan to government, which unfortunately has not gained much traction. And imagine we even spent about almost 2 to 3 years without a privatization board in which to engage with to see how we could push this agenda forward. But I believe that if we did create a capital market that is able to be the leading one in East and Central Africa, which we still are, despite the fact that we haven't had much movement over the last few years, we need to see more state enterprises being listed. We want to see the water utility companies, the Athi River Waters, the Nairobi water companies come to the market and float their shares. We want to see more democratization of wealth. We want to see an environment where parastatals can come and raise their funds through the stock exchange without having to go to the treasury and float more bonds. We'd like to see an environment. You see, right now, the situation we are faced with is one where the supply side is wanting, but the demand side is robust. 65% of all capital that's deployed in the NSC is foreign funds. And that in itself speaks to the fact that there's a high confidence in our economy. And the fact that we've seen the 20-share index rise by 50 points in the last 3 days is a clear show that there is confidence in our economy. Yeah. What we need to do now is put these pieces together. Murray is talking here for the small enterprises, and I think the small enterprises are front and center in the bottom-up economy. But let's also look at the NSC. We have the Ibuka program where small enterprises can come in, we can nurture them, we can polish them up and make them ready for listing. And I'm sure under our Ruto administration we can have that conversation. Let's see, right now unfortunately, about half of the total value of equities in Kenya is one company, Safaricom. What if we brought KPA in, if we brought Kenya Airports Authority in, we brought Kenya Pipeline in, and the government ceded about 30% of equity in those farms? The argument in government has always been, no, these are strategic assets that we must hold. But if we went to Euronext with officials of government last year in France, and literally almost all enterprises in France that were government-owned are listed. And what will be the positive effect of that is that it is possible, if they just did even 5 or 6 listings, for 10% of our national debt to be wiped out. If they went for a more aggressive push, we could have 20% of our national debt wiped out. So really, we have a very big opportunity to use the capital market to deal with some of the big problems that we face in this economy.
Indeed, and when you talk about, I think, assets and the assets utilization, asset sweating, have we done enough to make sure that the assets that we have as a country also give, the requisite investment that we put in these particular assets, right?
Yeah. One last point. I mean, one of the things also about bringing public enterprise to the market is that it improves corporate governance.
True.
You see, you cannot call Safaricom and say, we are forcing you to give a tender to X, Y, or Z, because they are governed by what the capital markets will require.
Yeah.
So, that framework will actually make sure that even corruption will be dealt with in this country.
In fact,
Let me go to Bilo. We'll come to you. We'll come to you. We'll come to you. I know. We'll come. Let me go to Bilo briefly. I wanted to ask, just hang on. I can see the frustration in your face. You want, I want us. Yeah, okay. He's donating some of his time to you.
What I wanted to say is the fear of public entities listing is for the same reason that Keeper said, that they actually don't want to be held accountable. So they would rather not list and continue doing this. But if actually they were forced into that position, then they are actually going to be managed differently. That's all I wanted to add. That's the fear.
Bilo, even though we're talking about the markets, we've always had the issue with the Eurobond. And I think if we go back to 5 years, there was the Sukuk bond also that we were talking about. And I think the requisite policy frameworks were put in place, but the implementation now has become dramatically different. Going with the Sukuk bond and the Eurobond, I know with the Sukuk bond it's a bit more friendly when you're talking about interest. You can try and enlighten us why the government also has not chosen that particular path of the Sukuk bond, and we know what the Eurobonds is doing to us right now that we have the dollar, being spooked because of of course the exaction of what the international market is doing to the dollar as it is. Could we broaden that idea of the Sukuk bond and how maybe it can be a relief for this current government when we are saddled with all this debt?
I do not know why the government did not go ahead with that. But there are many factors usually at play in this issue of funding. If you look at the papers today, you've seen a letter from the High Representative of the European Union.
Yes.
Insisting why Kenya should now look at Europe and not the East.
There's
always a lot of
interest.
International interest. Jostling for, yes. And so sometimes some of those decisions, like Sukuk, may not carry favor because of some other interests that, you should take the Euro bonds from. I don't know what was the reason, but it would have been a better deal. And the reason, but in my view, the main reason is for the same one that we discussed also last week. Why did the government not, you remember we discussed this last week, the fundamental thing here is there is a funding, or there's some funds, some kind of, funding structure which has accountability. When we discussed ADB, you remember ADB? Yes. These ones which carry accountability and these ones which don't carry accountability. So when you borrow from, for example, FDB, or when you go into the Sukuk funds and so forth, and which are very strict, and in terms of the requirements and so forth, as opposed to these other ones where you can, Eurobond, where there are questions of accountability, what happened to the money, because Eurobond was essentially budget support. The money, it's money you just put into the budget. These are, Sukuk bonds are specific, just like infrastructure bonds, or they're specific, and you cannot, just put it into your budget and that's it, and you don't know what happened to the money, and you use it to pay salaries and so forth. So I think I agree with you. Maybe the government needs to, now the challenge they have is they need to move away from some of those not only expensive and unpredictable in the case of the Eurobond because of now the yields and so forth, because of the what's happening to the dollar. But I think they need to move into not only Sukuk but specific kind of bonds like these infrastructure bonds if they want to. In my view, they don't need to go into infrastructure right now because of the challenges of the debts and so forth. And I don't think these guys today their priority is about debt. I think their priority will be how to limit debt more than in the immediate future. I would not advise this government to start looking at getting more debt. They can look at restructuring the existing debt. They can look at rescheduling some of the debts that they have. But I think to try and get new financing for new, they have talked about some. I don't know whether it's in their manifesto, like pay the pending bills. There have been talks about, getting some financing, for that purpose. But in my view, for this government, the immediate things that they need to do, in addition to what I think my colleagues have said, particularly the ones you've mentioned on the making the environment for the businesses to be more friendly. And today there are a lot of challenges. If you try and get a small kiosk to run your M-Pesa in Nairobi City Council here, the kind of licenses, the kind of regulatory environment makes it very difficult for people to do business. I think that working on that regulatory environment itself as an immediate thing is a low-hanging fruit that they can do, so that they can really. And then number two is give opportunities for, how would I put it, very simply, economic stimulus for, to get things moving across the country. It's small things that they need to start looking at very quickly. Allow some of these subsidies to continue so that people can still buy unga and people can still put some bread on, so you don't make the inflation and whatever. You need to address some of those subsidy issues so that we don't suffer immediately by, when these things come to a halt, like the unga has stopped and, fuel might stop and so forth. So I think he needs to address also. So I think these are some of the things he needs to do very quickly so that we, but long term, I'm sure all those things that have been mentioned, value addition, all those things are critical. But debt right now, whatever you call it, whether it's sukuk or Eurobond or whatever, I don't think it's an area that he needs to immediately start looking at.
Do you think there's a sort of sobriety that is coming right now, especially when we're training our focus also in the two chambers today? We know the National Assembly, they are amending the standing orders so that at least the exchequer, before we enter into any contractual agreement on matters debt, it has to pass through Parliament to get approval of Parliament, first of all, before they carry on with their contractual agreements. Sometimes we're just surprised that, Kenya has been courting this particular country. This is what is on the pipeline. We remember the Dubai and the ports, and people asking, how did this happen? There was no public participation, first of all. Today also, it's very key when we're looking at the Parliament, who will be the Speaker, who will be the Deputy Speaker, how will these things roll out? Will they implement the standing orders at the end of the day?
Not only the standing order, you see in the Constitution, for example, on debt, it is very clear when we did this. And I chaired in the Bomas working committee that did that chapter on public finance. We said Parliament must give prior approval to the government taking any loan. But in terms of what the government seems to be doing most of the time, and they're very clever, they always circumvent that. What they do is take the loans and just bring it to Parliament for approval, regularization. Yes, after. And not only loans, but even some of the expenditures. Yes. Sometimes they spend and then bring it back to Parliament for regular. And this is where accountability now becomes critical. When Parliament is independent, they can hold now the executive to account on that and say, no, sorry, how did you spend that? And that's why we gave them powers in this constitution to censure a CS, treasury, and even have him impeached or removed as a CS. It's because of those kind of things. But where Parliament, unfortunately, in the 10 years of Uhuru, it became it became the appendage of the executive. They were doing everything the government wanted, and Parliament was compromised, literally compromised. In the history of this country, I have not seen a situation where the executive would formally actually provide money so that the Parliament can do what they want through budgets. You've seen it. We've seen it through CDF and so forth. Money is allocated specifically to committees so they can do whatever the government wants. But otherwise, I think it's critical. If they change the standing orders and implement it, not just changing the standing orders, but enforce it, that would make a radical shift on the way the government is borrowing money. Yeah.
I can see you want to say something.
Yeah, I just think for me that one of the big opportunities also for the Ruto administration is for us to move from the impression that we are a government of largesse to that of austerity. I think we've seen many parliamentarians come from other parts of the world come and see our model and say, you guys, how much money do you have? Yes. And the reality is what we do have is a lot of debt. But if you count the number of Prados in the company and then a number of large cars and the per diems that are being paid and the way that our officials travel and etc., I think we really need to start to shake ourselves into reality and realize that we cannot live an extravagant lifestyle funded by debt. And the sooner we came to that reality, the better it is for us. I think the government needs to get out of the Dracula mentality where public debt is concerned, where it doesn't matter how much money you feed into it. Dracula would take blood, but then it doesn't matter how much blood it drank, it needed more blood. So I think we need to cut off the supply of debt, and we need to really look at the priorities. I think Bill mentioned it at the beginning. The issue is, what are the priorities? How can we focus on them? And finally, I think on the environment, one of the unintended consequences of the new constitution was a very heavy burden on legal and regulatory requirements. And there's no way the small and medium-sized enterprises can move forward with the myriad of licenses they need. To run a hospitality business in the counties requires 17 licenses. So how are you going to do business if you need to have a compliance officer in a small enterprise? So you see, we need to collapse this into a regime where you have a one-stop sort of regime. But more than anything else, I think for me, the future is extremely bright. And I'm sure that these are problems that we face, but they're problems that we can fix.
But also talking on the county funds, because I can see if you flip over to page 5 of the Business Daily there, it says senators are eyeing a law to speed up release of county funds. We're talking about the pending bills as well. They're saying here that the newly elected senators plan to make changes in law to impose sanctions on Treasury officials who fail to remit county resources within the set timelines in a bid to curb accumulation of pending bills. Wasingishu Senator-elect Jackson Mandago should say, and his Mandera counterpart Ali Roba say counties continue to accumulate debts owed to contractors and surplus despite the law requiring the Treasury to remit allocation to counties every 15th day of the month, in line with the County Allocation of Revenue Act. I think it's good to be on the other side where we really bore the brunt of it. Then you come now to to the floor of the House to implement, the requisite laws to try and streamline that. So I think it's a good move. It's a good move.
Yeah, I agree with you. That is, and I wish that were the case. But you see, the situation has a two-way function. If you say that the Treasury should and ought to remit this money,
yes,
the burden of responsible behavior also goes back to the county, because we also know that they have also been behaving very badly. And we saw in the earlier days, the first 5 years of a devolved state of affairs, counties were buying wheelbarrows at how much?
The carcinogenic wheelbarrows.
Yes. So
150,000.
Now, if you say that you want to be given money, that money will be remitted there for you to pay for those wheelbarrows. Then, so it calls for actually serious austerity measures and responsible behavior on the part of the governors, so that even as the resources are being deployed to the counties, then they are going to be used for the purpose for which they were meant. But Dibal, talk about the national debt. In your previous life, do you remember us debating about the national debt? And I was actually crucified by the former governor of Laikipia, Nderitu Mureithi, and Gabriel Negato, because I said we must put our eyes on that important figure there, because the debt, they say in Swahili, dawa ya deni ni kulipa. So it doesn't matter. Borrowing is very easy, but no matter how long you delay, you must pay. The longer you delay paying this debt, the more interest it attracts. And so I'm actually going to plead to the incoming government to be very careful and to lay a finger permanently on that debt situation. Because we risk being taken over. Every time I see the railway, the SGR threats that Chinese are coming to take over, it is not an empty threat. We could well lose everything that we have. But finally, if you look at these
Can I just cut in a bit to just speak over on what we're seeing on the screens right now? This is, of course, pictures coming live from you from Parliament, and we can see Sergeant of Arms there. They are trying to put the ducks in a row. In a moment, we will be having, of course, the MPs-elect also Stepping into the House, they will be sworn in today. They will know who will be the Speaker and the Deputy Speaker today. We've seen different faces, of course, being fronted, and how that will shake into place is what we'll be observing today from Parliament. And this House will have, of course, the balance of power. Different coalitions, as it were, will try and fill out the seats. And we've known so far the figures that have been shown from Kenya Kwanza and also Azimio in the National Assembly. Kenya Kwanza exceeding the numbers there from what we saw. Let me just give you the accurate figures. I don't want just to misquote what the figures are so that you are in the know. Looking at the balance of power there, we have 179 MPs. That is from the Kenya Kwanza side. 9 MPs from UDM, UPR, and MDG, who have since allied themselves with the alliance, has taken that figure up. We have 158, that is from the Azimio side as well. Total number of MPs from the Azimio La Umoja One Kenya side that is associated with Raila Odinga and Uhuru Kenyatta. And on the Senate side today, we'll see, that is the figure given is 67, the 35, that will be Kenya Kwanza, and 32 Azimio. And then we have the independents and the nominated members of Parliament as well. On the other side, you can see they're streaming in right now in the presence of Parliament. And we shall be able to also give you a full details of that as soon as that procession begins from 9 o'clock. So we continue pace with the conversation here. We're looking at, yes, you're watching Sokoni, the economic side of things, even as Parliament will be sworn in today. Back to you.
I was talking about the issue of independence of the institutions, the three arms. And Parliament, executive and judiciary must, for the sake of this country, remain independent but working together. Now, if you look at what you've just said, you've just read numbers there. And my prayer is that while Kenya Kwanza will be leading in numbers in Parliament, that they will not be captive to the presidency. And that's what we've seen in the last Parliament, where they were all answerable to the party leader. Now, if you look at the way things have appeared in the past, is if you don't align yourself with me, we blackmail you by cutting off your resources. The judiciary suffered a bit of that. Parliament is also able to blackmail executive. If you are telling us to do this, we'll not pass this budget. So this issue of blackmailing and counter-blackmailing must end. We must see these institutions for what they were meant, i.e. they are all independent but working together. Judiciary was partly to blame for the problems that we had in the last elections because of, again, taking decisions that are not necessarily in the best interest of this country and putting IEBC in the position that we put them in. So if we allow everyone to work independently but collectively for this country, then and then only shall we have a functional government that is devoid of all these intrigues.
Thank you. Kent?
Yes. I think we need to go back to the drawing table in terms of asking ourselves, how are we doing things and whether those things are really necessary. Some of these counties receive about 10 billion shillings a year. In 5 years, that's 50 billion. You visit the county, there is nothing to show for it, but they still tell you the money is not enough. So enough for what? For governors to buy houses, or what is the money really going? So I think as Kenyan people, let's really go back to the drawing table and say, what are we spending? What is the return on investment? It's a serious question. Parliament must engage. The Kenyans must engage. If we give the county money, can we be shown before we release the next tranche what the previous money has done? These are questions Kenyans gloss over. And we would always be told government is late in disbursing funds and the funds are not enough. And yet nobody audits what those funds are doing. The same applies to government. We want to say, yes, we have a minister. In fact, if you asked me today, the government should enter into maximum 3-year contracts with all the senior public officers. Because that is the international standard is 3 years. Within 3 years, if you do your job, you have achieved something. Let's not have guys, 10 years, we have some people who've been in government, the whole Jubilee government, 10 years as ministers. And when we discuss among ourselves, we were still asking, is so-and-so still a minister? Because they disappeared from public life maybe 5 years ago. They're hanging around, and they're earning money and running a ministry. So let's give 3 years with very clear performance contracts. Within 3 years, your contract is reviewed. If you have not performed anything, you are either held culpable, accountable, or blacklisted.
Yep.
Let's be serious.
Hard measures.
Very tough measures, even for ministers. Let them be given 3 years.
So we hack back to, was it the efficiency delivery unit that we had in the NAC administration?
Yes.
What was the name?
We have SCAC. We have the advisory board, and we had very serious, under Kibaki, we had very serious performance
But SCAC is still here.
Very serious performance contracts and efficiency monitoring unit.
Efficiency monitoring unit, yes.
Yeah, but you see, there is a difference between formulation of policy and implementation of policy. In Kenya, we put too much emphasis on formulation of policy and very little emphasis on implementation. So, for example, let me just add something very important. For the Kenya Kwanza government to achieve its objectives, there are two things you have to look at. First of all is the skill set of the people you are working with. Secondly, apart from their skill set, is their own personality. I will tell you, for example, there is something we call peer review, and this is something which we need to use if this government is to work. You cannot throw around in a hat, you tell us there is a cabinet, and we ask ourselves, we've been in this town, we've been in this country, half of the names are unknown people. No track record, nothing. They're hanging around and they thrown somewhere in a very powerful position. Or even a commission. But if you say peer review, for example, the four of us here have a very common history. We know each other. We can hold each other accountable. I've known Kiprono since we were in the same primary. That is more than 40 years. I know his track record. I know his strength. So if you give him a job and he messes up, he's accountable to our generation, to our peers. But that accountability is not there because these are unknown entity. I've known Biro for long. We've sat on several panels, designed things together and so forth. We are accountable. If I missed, he will find me in a shopping mall and ask me, why are you doing this? So that accountability is very crucial. That who are you accountable to? Even you are accountable here at Standard Media to somebody. But in public life, you say, why should I answer to you? You are answerable to somebody. So we bring in the skill set. There are people who are very good starters and there are others who are very good finishers. Don't assume because somebody comes with a big CV, you say that this CV entitles him to be a starter and a finisher. You must, and some of us who have worked in Europe, you go to a job interview, they profile you, they do your personality, they map you out, and they know exactly where your strengths and weaknesses are. So for this immediate, what the president needs to be assisted on is to get very strong starters, people who are very good at starting, because this needs a heavy push. But if you put finishers at the beginning here,
even in really,
these guys will just be discussing and telling, there's a commission, there's a report, look at this, let's go to Mombasa, let's do this. Starters get things started. Once they're finished their role, ease them out, bring the finishers.
Indeed.
Kibono is a very good starter. He's very good at starting things.
You mean he's not good at finishing?
No, he's very good at starting businesses, and he has very good formulation and a good knack of what works out.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Bilo,
Yes.
let's hear from you. I wanted just to raise also the question of, when you're talking about the wage bill, the way we have had the bloated wage bill, they need to pare down on some of these allergies that we can see, the big SUVs that are here right now. There's a question also of staff auditing, that some of these parastatals, we have bloated staff, beginning with KEMSA, just we saw almost 800, 900 staff. It has been pared down to 350. We will always talk about rationalization of the parastatals, them that they have duplication of work, they need to be enjoined together, and try and bring down the wage bill, because I think we are spending so much of exchequer on the wage bill. Where does Ruto begin?
But let me say at the outset that the issue about what you've been reading in the papers, the county governments carrying out an audit of staff, every county now is saying there are ghost workers in their hundreds.
Yes.
State corporations. This is all about corruption that Keith mentioned earlier. It's about what everyone knows. It's the questions of integrity, the people who are managing these institutions. So people are employed, sometimes employed legally, sometimes, you call them ghost workers, you call them whatever. So if the government looks at the issue of, for one reason, they are going to look at it anyway, because IMF and these donors, they're already demanding that they need to look at the staff, the wage bill. Mm-hmm. So he doesn't have much room on that. He has to look at the wage bill. But on the other hand, we have the questions of unemployment. It's not also the right thing to do to start sending thousands of Kenyans home in the middle of a crisis of the economy, unemployment, lack of incomes, and so forth. But I think there are, in areas we've discussed many times, like state corporations, where the government can rationalize, not just on ministries and employees and so forth, but also in state corporations. There are state corporations that are not really relevant. They are not relevant, or some of the things they are doing are not necessarily things that the government would do. And NSC, and we've been talking about it for years. Some of these institutions need to have been privatized, and so forth. There's duplication. Government ministries and departments doing work that should have been done by the county governments. It's well known. Some of those functions have been devolved, but you see, the national government is still doing that. So I think, yes, it can do a lot of things in terms of, cutting down on the wastages, inefficiencies, and reducing some of those roles of especially in the ministries, and leaving some of this work to the county government. I'm telling you, it can cut down on the public wage bill without necessarily even sending people home. But in terms of rationalizing the ministries, in terms of rationalizing the work of some of the state corporations and so forth. So I think, yeah, you can do it. But, it's the timing is critical. With one of the reasons why he managed to get elected as the president is people have challenges in the economy, unemployment, and so forth. So if he starts off by, trying to address wage bill through employment levels, reducing the employment levels, then I think that may backfire. But we discussed, I think, the points mentioned by Kip earlier about, austerity. I mean, look at the way government lives. Even the private sector does not have that kind of luxury in government today. People are spending billions on not just travel, but on flowers, on things which consultancies, on. If you look at the way that you look at this paper, half of the advertisements every day is government.
Hey, don't mention.
Well, okay.
Our business will go down.
So this is a government. When you go and look at how governments work in Ethiopia, in Rwanda, and others, and where the shilling is actually used as a shilling, the value is a shilling. Here, a shilling is not worth anything. We've gone to a level where we are putting up a toilet for 1 billion shillings, and it will be officially opened by a leader. Yes.
1 billion.
So, the thing there's nothing we haven't seen in this country. And the people who do it are working free.
Maybe it was a 3-tier sort of
Gold.
whatever you call it. But I think so there is room. When I was the Shadow Finance Minister, let me tell you, in the time of Kibaki, we used to take the pen and pencil and go through detailed scrutiny of the government expenditure, the estimates. When you take a pen and pencil and go through government estimates, you actually find a lot of fat you can remove. So much. You know, there's a lot in every ministry that you can save billions, tens of billions of things. You know what happens is because they do an incremental budget. You just take what you did last year, treasury, and add a percentage on it. So nothing changes. If we were spending in this office 10,000 a month on newspapers, next they look at inflation, how much? Okay, 12,000 this year. And that's not the way you can save. So if you take a pen and pencil and go through the government scrutiny of printed estimates, you can save a lot of money. You can save a lot of money in this country. There's a lot of wastage, a lot of inefficiencies. And these are the things that I think, the personality, I don't know if it was someone said something about the personality. You know, in leadership, the management style and personality also counts. If you have a leader who's hands-on, and I know William, I worked with all these guys. William is not the kind of guy you can give a document and tell him this is it, read it, or present it. No, he's the guy who wants to go through everything and take a calculator himself and go through things and study things and, make an analysis and, he's a hands-on guy. If you have somebody who is like that, things are not going to be the same. I would imagine he will hold offices to account. We had a situation in the last 5 years or 10 years of President Uhuru where CSs were doing what they want. Government was they were doing free.